We're now on Kuf Tes Vav Amid Beis. V'chazinu lialter. And the ladies are testifying that we saw the body come up from the water, and we saw that these were the two men that we knew were on the ship, and we identified their bodies, and we know that they died. Now, how did these ladies know that for sure so-and-so, the husband of so-and-so, died? Because after all, maybe the body changes, the face specifically, the countenance, when a person drowns. The water itself, would mar his face, his features. So how do these ladies know to identify the bodies of a drowned person? Ka'amri simonim. They can identify certain unusual marks on his body. I'll give a contemporary example, and don't take me literally here, but supposing they know that he has a tattoo, a small tattoo on his back. That's called simonim. And even if you can't identify the facial features of the person, but you know that this is that person based on that simon that you find on his body. So again, if they don't bring simonim, then the face changes in a drowned person, and therefore you cannot identify him with any level of certainty. But the lavalayu samchinan, once they bring simonim, we don't have to base ourselves on their testimony, which always implies a certain amount of judgment, and maybe they conjectured. There's no element of conjecture here. We have something totally objective, totally reliable, and that's simonim. So again, if you're asking, would Rebbe rely on the testimony of one witness or of women? And the answer is only if there are simonim that are off. And now the Gemara is going to get into a whole discussion about simonim. In a case where, let's say, Reuven owns an object and he deposits it in the hands of Shimon. So Reuven is the mafkid, Shimon is the nifkad. And Reuven wants to come back and identify the object that he gave to Shimon. There it is. And now Reuven has to give simonim to prove, because Shimon the nifkad is saying, I gave it back to you. And Shimon is saying, what do you mean you gave it back to me? It's sitting there on your living room table, and I can identify it with simonim. So that's going to be the Gemara that we want to start now. Ahu Gavra. Ahu Gavra the Afkid Shumsheme Gabi Chavre. Apparently, he put sesame seeds in some sort of a barrel, and he deposited. Shimon is the nifkad in the hands of Shimon. Amalei, after a certain period of time, Reuven the mafkid comes to Shimon the nifkad, and he says, Havli shumshemei, return my shumshem. Amalei shkaltinu. The nifkad, meaning Shimon, responds, you already took him. So the mafkid says to him, it seems like no one's really lying over here, but people are a little bit confused. Right? V'akein v'chein havyon. I didn't take it back. Here's the amount of shumshim sitting on your table. Let's say it's a saw of shumshim. So here's the saw. Look at it. So the Gemara says that, and he adds ubechavita ramyon. If you look at the shumshin that I gave you are still sitting there in the same, in the same chavis, in the same receptacle. Amalei. So the Nifkid says, "Di doch shkaltinu v'hani achrininu." Just because you had an exact volume of a saw in a chavis, that doesn't mean anything. I have another chavis that's not yours, looks almost identical to yours, and it has a saw of shumshim in it. So the question here is, can we rely on the siman that Ruvain is saying that's mine because that's the amount, the volume of shumshim, and it's in the same kli that I gave it to you? Sovrav Chizdel Meimar, Hainu Shnei Talmidei Chachamim. They already categorized the story of the loss of the two Talmidei Chachamim, where Rebbe believed them, the Nashim, as a kind of categorical case. It became like a breakthrough Supreme Court decision. And anything similar to Shnei Talmidei Chachamim, where we don't say that, the two people that went down, now we found two other bodies, two other corpses. Other than that, Lo Amrinan Hanach Ozuli Alma, that the two corpses, well, I shouldn't say corpses, but the two Talmidei Chachamim swam away. They survived it, ended up on another island somewhere, and these are different corpses. But rather, we assume that these are, and we're going to rely on the women who testified, in fact, the same two Talmidei Chachamim that went down, and that's based on Simonim. What is the Simonim here? As we said before, the women are testifying that they saw something unusual, a mark, maybe a birthmark on the body. And that's why we rely on it. And here also, Rav Chizda says he, the Mafkid, Shimon, Ruvain, as we called him, he identifies that these are the saw in that chavetz that he gave him. We're not going to say it was switched around. Amalei Rava says to Rav Chizda, Midami. That's not a fair analogy. Hassam, there in the case of the Maisa with the two Talmidei Chachamim who drowned, Ka'amri, the women are saying, Simonim, there are definite, reliable Simonim. I mean, what are the chances that two other bodies somehow died over here and we found their corpses and they have the identical birthmark on the back and the blah, blah, blah of the two Talmidei Chachamim? Those are reliable Simonim. Hacha, but here in the case of Shumshimi, my Simona Islu. Well, what kind of Simon is it? They don't really, the Mafkid doesn't really have a reliable, genuine, precise Simon. Ukamar came v'chein havit, even though he says, look, this is the amount of Shumshmin that I gave you in a chavis, etc., etc. Eimer chushbon asrami. Maybe it happens to be that, okay, when you measure out Shumshmin, you measure out by a saw, and this saw is not the same saw that was originally deposited by Reuven. So that minyan, that volume that the Mafkid claims is a Simon, it's Matzui. Matzui means it's very common. So the Nifkad may have other, chavios that have the same volume of Shumshmin, and this Simon is not reliable. Amalei Mark Shisha Bar Rav Chizda L'Ravashi Michai Shinin Shema Pinon. Are you really worried about the possibility, or considering seriously the possibility that maybe the Nifkad, that means Shimon, had already given back the Shumshmin to Ruvain, and now in that place exactly where the Shumshmin of Ruvain were, now Shimon takes his own Shumshmin or other people's and puts it in that place. And I think what we're dealing with here is, in my humble opinion, is a principle called kan nimta kan hoya. That if we see an object in that location, we assume that that was put there and it remained there until we know otherwise. But now we're learning a Mishnah in the 4th chapter of Masechet. Mata Kli. So now we have a bunch of cases where they used to put the first letter in the Hebrew language as a symbol for an entire word. And they did this to apparently clandestiny, to keep it secret from the authorities. So, for example, there's a kuf. The kuf stands for carbon, and that means hegdish. And mem would stand for meiser. Not sure which meiser it is, meiser risha, meiser sheni. And dalid stands for dimua. Dimua means there's a mixture of chulin and truma in this kli. Tes stands for tevel, and tav for truma. And b'shas sakana, when there were xeris against Jewish people for being the kind of the mitzvahs, tav achas truma. They didn't write out the word truma. Then they would get in trouble with the authorities, so they wrote out just the tav, the tav for truma. Now, in all these cases, we assume, based on that letter, that the contents of that kli are exactly what that letter symbolized, what it stood for. And we're not going to say that, well, you know what, maybe he took out the contents of the kli when he had actually put truma in this kli, and then he put chulin into the kli. We're not going to say that. We're going to be machmir. We're going to assume that only a kohen could eat the contents of this kli because it has a tuff on it. So to here, in the case of Shumchamin, Markshisha argues against Rava that we're not choshesh for Shema Pinon, that maybe he took away this and he put this in its place. So I wrote myself a long note here on the side, but I don't understand this Gemara at all. We have a principle of Dini Maminos of Amotzi Mechaver Levarayah. And if the Nitan, which is the Nifkad in this case, Shimon, if he has a claim against the Tviyah of the Tovea of Ruvain, the Mafkid, then the Amotzi Mechaver, the Mafkid has to prove it. And there's a counterclaim against his claim that maybe his Shumshim already returned, and this is a different set of Shumshim. Amotzi Mechaver Levarayah. What does that have to do with the question of truma? Do I assume since as a tough, it's still truma? They were dealing with Isav Heter, has its own set of rules and regulations. I don't know. Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi, the Lochai Shina and Shema Pinon. You're proving from a Mishnah in Meiser Sheni that we can assume that since it says a tough on it, that what's inside of it is truma. And we don't suspect entertain the possibility that maybe in the meantime he switched it. Aim a sefer. You're only quoting the ratio of that Mishnah. What about the sefer of the Mishnah of Yossi Omer Afilu Matzah Chavis? Kosav Aleh Truma, the whole word truma was written out. Harei L'chulin. Shani Omer Ishtakid Hava Moli Truma Upina. Last year, when he brought in his new crop and he was mafresh truma and he put it into that chavis and he put the tuff on it or he wrote the word truma, that was truma. But a year since then has gone by. In the meantime, he needed that chavis. And in all likelihood, he put chulin in the chavis. Now, here there's a whole discussion in the commentaries. Why would the Gemara raise an objection for Rabbi Yossi? We pass like the Tanakam against Rabbi Yossi. So the gist of it is that basically even the Chachamim, the Tanakama, would agree fundamentally that there's a concept called Pinon, that he switched it from one contents to the other. Here there's an exceptional reason why we don't believe Pinon, because a person would not allow writing Truma on a chavis that might bring someone to a michshol That's what the Gemara explains now. The Kuli Amachayshina and Shema Pinon. Even the Tanakama agrees to Rabbi Yossi fundamentally that we believe that he switched around. Most people, they don't keep Truma there the whole year round. The whole year round, they put Chul in there. And that's called Pinon. For Hacha, and what's a machlokas here? Welcome, Imar Savar and Isa de Pinu, Michpar Havi Kofar. The Tanakama holds that in this case, we have an exception to, we have circumstantial evidence to prove that he did not switch it, because when a person has in mind to switch it from Truma to Chulin, then what we would do is he would take an eraser, if I can call it that, and erase the word Truma from the outside of the Kli, so that no one thinks it's Truma. Because if they think it's Truma, then there could be a tremendous takala. So he definitely would have taken off the word Truma from the Kli if he actually switched. The fact that it still says Truma on it and he left it there as a deliberate action, it proves that there's Truma inside of it. The Idach. So what's Rabbi Yossi going to say? Why did he allow that takola, so to speak, without erasing the name Truma? Maybe he forgot about it. Perhaps he wanted to protect his own possessions. Like you write inside a sefer your name. So what he did, he wrote Truma, so people stay away from it. So it's a deliberate decision to leave the word Truma, even though it's Kulin inside. But in any event, you see from this Gemara that at the end of the day, we're very serious about Pinon, that maybe he took into this. So if you ask me in the case of the Mafkid and the Nifkad, I don't believe the Mafkid would be able to collect from the Nifkad. And in the case of the two Talmidei Chacham that died, there's such an outstanding, objective, and reliable siman by the fact that they identify the marks on his body. That's why we believe that there's no Shema Pinon over here. Yitzchak Reichko Lutza Bar Achte de Rabbibi Havika Azil Mikurtava Laspamya Ushach. So this gentleman by the name of Yitzchak, he died on his way from Kurtava to Aspamya. Sholchu Mehasam. Now the question is whether his wife could get married. We need testimony that he died. And they sent from Aspamya to Kurtava this following message, this notification. Yitzchak Reish Galusa Bar Achte de Rabbibi Avika Azal Mikurta Aspamya Ushchiv. So the Gemara now vacillates. Michai Shina L'Trei Yitzchak? Olo? Okay, we heard the announcement. Yitzchak died, but maybe there's another Yitzchak. It's not the Yitzchak that's married to this woman. Maybe it's a different Yitzchak. Now, Yitzchak is a pretty common name, although I have to admit, Yitzchak Reish Galutz is not a common name. Abai Omer Chayshina, Rav Omer Lo Chayshina. Abai says we have to be afraid and suspect the possibility that there's another Yitzchak Reish Galutz who went from Kurtova to Aspanya and died in Aspanya. And Rav says Lo Chayshina. We have no hazaka that there's another person who has exactly the same name. Today, in our time, you open up a telephone book, you'll see 1 million people with the same name. Goes on and on and on for certain names. Yeah, but Yitzchak, Reish Galutza, that's unusual. Oh, not only that, Bar Achte de Rabbibi. Now leave out politics here, forget it. But he's the nephew of Bibi. So how many people have that exact title? Omar Abai bino abili. So now Abai has to sort of defend himself. What's the source for the halachic suspicion that there are two people with the same name? Now, who Gita? They found a get. Ishkacha ben Nardo in the city of Nardo. Uksiv, and it says in the get, Betzad Klonio Mosa. He writes here, Betzad Pelach Sheshmo Klonio. Shahay B'tocha Ira Gdola Nardo. So I guess we're talking about sort of like a province within, or a borough within Nardo. And no, what does it say in the get? Anjolinai. That was his name. Doesn't sound like an original Jewish name. Nardo. I live in Nardo. Patris. I was Megarish, Betrechis. That's another way of saying he was Megarish, or he potted up his wife, Yos Plonis Incessant. Now, the wife of Andruloi was a resident of Nardo, and she's claiming that this is her get, and she dropped it, she lost it, and you found it in the city of Nardo. Give it back to me, because I need that for proof in order to allow me to get married. And it seems that the father of Shmuel had a suffix about this. He didn't know whether or not we should suspect another person from Nardo with the name Andrulini. Doesn't sound like a very serious kind of question. Sholach Avud Shmuel Kami to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, and Sholach Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya sent back to Yibadik Nardo Kula, check the entire city, this metropolis called Nardo, and guarantee yourself that there's no one in the city who has the name Andruloi. Maybe there's another Andruloi who authorized the writing of this get. So we see clearly, says Abaye, that we have to worry about someone else in the city with that same unusual name. And we won't be matir in agency. So it's true that you heard a very clear call, shall we call it, about the death of Yitzchak Reish Galusa, but maybe there's another Reish Galusa by the name of Yitzchak. And I'll prove it to you because of the response of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya to Avur Shmuel. For Rava, how is Rava going to justify this raya that Abai brings? What's his counter argument? Okay, so now let's just skip for a second. Rava is going to claim that the reason why Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya said, let's check out the city of Nardo, is only to give a little cover to Avur Shmuel, but it really wasn't a suffix at all. In Isa, Yibodei Kala Olav Yiboile. Maybe Rebbe should have said, let's scan the entire world and find out if there's someone who lives somewhere, maybe even on the moon, by that same name, Andruloi. Elos, you'll ask me, so why did Rabbi Yehuda say that we have to scan through the entire city of Nardo? He didn't want to cause any chalishus hadas to Avur Shmuel. It's a very interesting ethical statement in the Gemara that if somebody asks you a question, you want to build up the question, even though you realize it's a ridiculous question. Omar Rav Mina immediately. And what's my proof that we're not chodesh for another person in the city if we don't know that there is such a person? We have two shtaros, and these are shtarei chov that indicate that somebody owes money to the malva. Uksivbe, and who is the malva? Well, in one shtar it says Chavi bar Nanai, and the other shtar it says Nanai bar Chavi. So again, this whole story about finding two shtarei chov, was brought to the attention of Rabbi Bar Avua, the Agbi Bezuzah, and he validated the two shtaros, allowing Chavi and Nanai to collect whatever was written in this shtar. So Rava says, "V'ha'hacha." Chavi bar Nanai v'Nanai bar Chavi b'mechoza shchichet tuva. I guess there's a whole family with these names. So there are many other people in the city with the name Chavi bar Nanai. Or Nanoi bar Chavi. So since there are other people with that name, so why aren't we afraid that maybe the Lova borrowed money from somebody else and not from these guys? And when they drop the shtar, or whoever did drop the shtar, then we have a right to say we don't know exactly who it is. You can't collect based on that shtar. And yet, Rabba Bar Avua, Agvi Bahu, he collected both of these chovot respectively based on the shtaros. And by analogy, in the case of an Eishes Ish, which is much more chamur, then at least in the case where it's lo huksaku shnei anoshim b'shem zeh, we're not going to be choshesh. We're not going to worry about the possibility that there's someone else on the face of the planet who has the same. Abaye. How does Abaye justify that we can rely on these two stars? That Rabba Bar Avua was machshav these two shtaros. Afterwards, Abaye who maintained that we have to be choshesh for another person with the same name. And the answer probably is, I heard this from my Rebbe many times, what's called Tfisas Balashtar. That the Balashtar, his name is written in the shtar, he is holding on to the shtar.